So can you expand for a minute on what you were talking about with the different presentations to the pharma for licensing versus, because it just seems like licensing is the way you have to go now because there's no money, right?
Yeah, I think there's very little money, right, for venture capital. There are all kinds of opportunities when partnering with pharma, depending on the stage of the asset and what's next, what's missing, what kind of risk is involved. We have everything from MTAs where we've taken in someone else's compound and then done experiments that they may not have been able to do or they weren't particularly interested in doing, and then we share the data. All the way through, of course, acquisitions. And I think the ultimate structure depends on what the two companies are interested in gaining. If licensing is very common, but we primarily do that when something's already in the clinic. When it's preclinical, we will occasionally license, but we also may do an option where we provide the funding for them to do the phase one,
right,
with an option afterward. That alleviates some of the risk, but even more importantly, I think a point to get across to biotechs is that every pharma company is different. And they have a different history, they have different leadership, they have a different philosophy, they have a different pipeline, and they have different kinds of constraints, right? So it's kind of like a contractor. They say there are 3 features of a contractor you'd invite into your home. You could be fast, you could be cheap, or you could be good. And it's impossible to get all 3. You can only get 2 at most.
right.
So it's kind of the same thing with pharma companies. I'm making this up off the cuff, but they either have a lot of money, but not internal resources, or they have a lot of internal resources, but they might not have money, or they have an empty pipeline, need a lot of stuff. They have a full pipeline, they only need very targeted stuff, and so on. For Merck, commonly it comes down to internal manufacturing and really labor intensive research that would need to be done. And so if there's an opportunity to get that done outside, either through a WuXi or otherwise, or for the company to take on that responsibility and for us to pay for it, that probably fits Merck well. It may not fit X other company.
Okay.
And I think that's part of understanding. And that's obviously very different from how a VC thinks about it, because they're thinking we could ultimately partner this with anybody. So the most important thing is just to build the strength of the asset, and then we'll find the right partner.
Okay.
I think there are, a big part for us of finding the right asset is actually finding the right partner and really feeling like it's a partnership. If I get the feeling through hairs raising on the back of my neck that someone's trying to put lipstick on a pig, I'm just not interested. If, on the other hand, someone's got really promising data and then all they talk about is, but the problem with this data is X, or the part we don't understand is Y, or the challenges we're going to face are Z, I love it, right? Because that's the way I've got to think. And now we've got partners who really think through that. They've been thinking about it longer and harder. That is really ideal. And so less salesmanship, more data. Now I understand if all you've got is a pig, you're
right.
You have to do what you have to do for your shareholders or otherwise. But I think in general, the best strategy is really to follow the science, focus on the data, understand the opportunities, talk to a lot of people early. We've had issues where, some very early companies, and it tends to be people who are less experienced, will be really concerned about sharing information, even under an NDA. I would ask them to point to the last time ever when some biotech sued Merck for stealing their idea, and running with it. It's just not who we are, and I think the overwhelming majority of companies are like that. Sure. So that's not nearly as savvy as the person who's doing it thinks it is. It's actually kind of the opposite.
Right. In fact, I just had that experience with a founder who sent me a deck and asked me to sign an NDA, and I signed it, but I signed it sort of with reticence. Okay, just like, what are you even thinking here? And then when I opened the deck, I thought, there's nothing here anyone would want to steal.
Yeah. So that's one
No
situation.
science.
Another situation is where somebody has something good, and then we think very hard about how to make sure we're not contaminating teams who might have an interest in the same type of target. About if I become contaminated by seeing information, then that may mean we just can't move in that direction as a company. So we don't sign those NDAs lightly. We think really hard because you don't know what's going to be in that confidential deck.
Right, right. Is there a process that a founder would go through in terms of approaching Merck rather than being approached?
There is. So we have, a very public business development office, as do all of the major pharma. They're trying to get out there as much as possible to the bios, the JPMs, supporting conferences and everywhere else. They want to vet 20 things for everything that we escalate up to a possible relationship. And the other thing is, it's very uncommon that we see something. I mean, we may see something at a meeting that's a clinical asset and say, wow, that's really exciting. But most of the time, it's a very protracted relationship. We hear about something and then, the team vets it, that we might give back some ideas to the biotech. They can decide whether or not they think those are valuable, but let's circle back in 6 months and see where things are. And then 6 months later, we do that, and 6 months, and so on. We purchased Imago for $1.3 billion for their LSD1 inhibitor. That relationship had been at least 2, maybe 3 years long of going back and forth, talking through the composition of matter and then the design of the initial clinical trials and everything else. So I think, again, it's about being open and building relationships.
Right, right. Well, is there anything else that you might say to a founder about working with a pharma?
I wish there was kind of a tutorial on YouTube for how to make the most effective deck, how to give the most effective presentation. Because I think that some founders, they're just starting at this, and it's very different than giving a talk at AACR. So I would say, get out there, get access to other people's decks, their presentations, things like that, and really try to get immersed in that ethos, that experience. Because I think it'll help a lot. I'm actually going to take that question and think on it more, so I have better answers.
Great. And I might point out to you that at noon today, there is a tutorial, a 2-hour tutorial about how to do a pitch deck.
Oh, great.
So, I don't know.
Who's organizing that?
Beg your pardon?
Who is organizing that?
Well, Bullpen is actually, this isn't the right word, but has some relationship with JP Morgan and the research there. And they're a sponsor of the conference to some degree. They are promoting low-cost hotels, things like that. I've only recently become acquainted with it. But I am going to tune in today and just kind of listen in the background and see what I hear. Can I ask you a direct question about the decks, though? See if your thoughts align with mine. How important are the financial projections in a deck?
They are probably the least valuable, next to the pictures of the building that the research is taking place in, or stuff like that.
Right.
And in fact, when I open up a deck, in slide number 2 is the breast cancer market is projected to be $30 billion.
Right.
Dollars by so and so. I'm rolling my eyes already. Right. Because it's just a level of sophistication that's below where we want to partner.
Right. I another founder hired someone, paid $5,000 for him to do financial projections. I'm like, no one cares. All they care about is what's the science.
Yeah. One other thing I'd say about it,
and are you the person to bring that science to the market? That's all that matters. The market is huge.
Right.
No one cares.
Right. The other thing about partnering, obviously, is who are the people we're partnering with. So it does matter, who those people are, what experience they might have had. I'm a former academic. I'm a believer that having the right academic sort of scientific external advice can be very valuable. If I see somebody I know and really respect, I know they wouldn't join that SAB unless they thought there was value there. So those are other things that can come out in the presentation.
Great. And do you ever sort of think in the back of your mind, this probably isn't the right deal for us, but then circle back 6 or 9 months or a year later and find that, in fact, it is the right deal?
Well, I've only been in this job for less than 2 years, so I haven't had too many opportunities to follow that long. I do think there's something percolating right now where, we told the company that their molecules just did not meet the criteria where we would seriously think we'd have a toxicity concern, and we weren't sure they would really be best in class and so on, and gave them almost a target profile. And they emailed recently and say they're getting very, very close to that. Would be willing to meet next month and go through their updates. That could be an example.
Okay. Thanks for tuning in to the Life Sciences and Biotech podcast. We'll see you in the next episode. The information contained in this website and podcast are purely informational and not considered investment recommendations. Tim Doherty's participation in Biotech Insights is separate and apart from his role as an investment advisor representative. Nothing contained herein can be construed as a recommendation or endorsement of any of the companies discussed. Tim Doherty also has no financial affiliation with any of the companies mentioned in this communication. Tim Doherty makes no representation that the information contained in this material is accurate and is under no obligation to update this information as changes occur.